Hey, so there is a topic that I've been wanting to talk about ever since it happened, really, a few days ago. And there's a argument that I haven't really seen people use all that much in concerns to this. So, in case if you've been kind of under a rock for the past couple of days, you would know that um, Ronnie Radke of Falling in Reverse recently had a falling out with Eddie Trunk of SF SFX, I think. Let me uh let me look him up because I'm pretty sure he was also on a TV show called That Metal Band or something like that. Um yeah, Sirius XM. Okay. So I was kind of right. So they had gotten into a really big debate about what constitutes as a live performance. You know, what should you what should you risk in order to make the performance good and things along those lines. Because Eddie Trunk had a problem with Ronnie Radke canceling his show or his tour. Well, I'm not actually sure if it was the tour itself or if it was just the show because I'm pretty sure Ronnie Radke is going to another location later on. So I don't think the tour is actually off. But what sparked this to begin with is that Ronnie Radke said that his band's computers, his their PCs, which basically runs the tracks and does a lot of technical things in terms of sound, had gone missing from the airport and that they had ended up in a different location. Okay, Eddie Trunk took offense to this. He said you shouldn't cancel a show more or less because you forgot your computers, blah 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 blah. Um you should have just played the show live and he said this pretty boomer take about I'm watching Aerosmith right now with like a 78-year-old singer who's playing piano. Um, but I give them props for being honest. And little does he know that, and I find it very hard to believe that somebody like Eddie Trunk, who's been with SFX for so long, doesn't know that even bands like Aerosmith use backtracking or tracks, because he kind of shot himself in the foot when he said that I'm watching a singer who's like 78 years old playing piano and singing because obviously the tour life is not for everyone. Um, there are rock and roll stars today like Ozzy Osbourne who probably has to use tracks now just because of his age alone. There are times where Ozzy can't even be standing up for hours on end. He has to sit down while he sings. Obviously, when you've been doing this type of stuff for over 34 years, I mean, it's going to do a toll on your voice, it's going to do a toll on your body, and that's not even including drugs that, like stuff like cocaine that these band members and different types of bands have been taking from the 80s and 90s. Um, every everyone, most I would say most bands today use some form of tracking, tracks that and if you don't know what a track is, I probably should have explained this before I went off on this tangent, but a track in the music world is basically a pre-recorded instrumental that plays while the band is on stage in case if anything was to happen. Let's say hypothetically, if your drum member accidentally breaks his arm and he stops playing, the drums will keep playing because it's on a track. Um, And an argument I haven't seen been made yet is that a ton of bands nowadays, like just the genre in general, has become much more electronic. You know what I mean? I mean, Anthrax came out with an album, and on that album there is a song called "Bring the Noise," and it's Anthrax featuring a very prominent rap group back in the day called Public Enemy, and this track was released in 1987, I think. So this is before Guns N' Roses got its footing in the early 1990s. And you have to think Kiss had just broke up in 1982. So, there are things going on in the 1980s that are kind of revolutionary and happening during this time. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is even before Nirvana. Um, so this is before even the grunge scene had even been created. So, for Anthrax and Public Enemy to even, you know, to even collab, I mean, I'm sure that Public Enemy had to have some sort of track playing whenever they were on stage with Anthrax when they did the show live. So basically for the last like 34 years, ever since ever s- I would honestly say that it kind of started with Anthrax collabing with Public Enemy, because that was like one of the first instances where it was like someone had the balls to put rap and rock and roll, or metal, should I say, together. And it was one of the first times where people realized that these two genres can coexist, they can work. And it's just it's interesting, and it's an argument that I don't see people make anymore, because it's like, especially boomers nowadays, where they're all in their like late 40s, mid 50s, and whether they knew it or not, their bands were playing with tracks even in the 80s, even in the 90s. I don't think a band has played genuinely live since the late 70s, like when Black Sabbath was big, like back when Jimi Hendrix was big, back when Roy Buchanan was big. Um, which of course, I mean, this is before the invention of pedals and wah-wahs and all this other stuff, all these effects that you can just touch with your foot, and it changes the distortion of your guitar. Um, which is another interesting point, because it's like, if you're gonna sit here and be a boomer about metal music, it's like, why are you not complaining about guitarists using wah-wah pedals? um why are you not complaining about guitarists like Zach Wild just completely abusing pinch harmonics? I mean, like, I don't know. I've definitely seen throughout the years that metal fans have just been progressively complaining about something throughout the decades. I mean, I'm sure people that grew up with metal in the late 70s, and even stuff like the Beatles and the Beach Boys, which you can't really call Beach Boys, rock and roll, but you get what I mean. The people who more or less grew up on the very foundations of metal music were probably complaining about how certain people played the guitar. I don't like how it's so unorthodox, and all this and all that. And then people who revolutionized this unorthodox way of playing and people who had their own sound then started complaining about, well, I don't like wah wah pedals. And then it's like 10, 20 years later, nobody gives a fuck about wah wah pedals, and now they're complaining about the use of computers in their live performance. And it doesn't make it it makes little to no sense, really. I mean, it, you're arguing against change. You're arguing against evolution. And I don't like that. I mean, it doesn't make any sense because there's nothing you can do and say that will prevent it from happening. Just like grunge. Grunge was a super popular thing when it came out in 1989, when Nirvana came out with their first album, Bleach. You know, and even before grunge, people were into Guns N' Roses. Like Axl Rose was the Kurt Cobain of his time. Everyone wanted to be like Axl Rose. Everyone wanted to wear, leather pants and like a oversized flannel with a baseball cap. And it's like, Nirvana comes out and it's another strand of rock and roll or metal, whatever you want to call it, that people just got addicted to. And I'm sure there were. I mean, let's take it from the bull's mouth. Dave Grohl, former drummer for Nirvana, he even said that whenever they saw Axl Rose wearing a Nirvana hat in their hit song November Rain, that he said they couldn't even believe it when they saw it because Nirvana was just such an under the radar band in 1989 that he said they got shit on a lot by a lot of other artists, by a lot of other metal bands, by a lot of other rock bands. He said, Nirvana, when they first started in 1989, he said, they got their asses kicked by metal bands, and they said, they were the underdog for like the longest time before they became, super super popular. And I mean, it's just it's the same principle, really. I mean, Nirvana came during a phase where the revolutionary transition in music had happened again, where you know in the 80s, what made Guns N' Roses so revolutionary is that when they came out in the late 80s, early 90s, or should I say mid 80s, early 90s, um there were a huge just plethora of hairspray bands. I mean, people wearing like their sister's clothes, lipstick, eyeliner, just hairspray. And what made Guns N' Roses so cool back in the day is that they didn't wear a lot of that stuff. I mean, you know, sure, you probably had, Slash wearing leather pants or like, Axl Rose wearing like spray in his hair, but for the most part, like outside of music videos, they dressed like normal people. I mean, Axl Rose would be wearing like a Red Hot Chili Peppers t-shirt with like shorts and Nike shoes. I mean, there have been these little revolutionary changes throughout the genre um every decade. And it it just doesn't make sense to me why someone like Eddie Trunk would even complain about something like that because how can you be so far behind in the genre of rock and roll not to realize that bands hardly play live anymore? I mean, sure, the vocals are there, sure, the guitars are there, sure, the drums are there, but there's always going to be a backtrack during that, like a backing track behind that song in the live performance, almost 9 out of 10 times. I think there's a band that had just come out relatively relatively lately. They're called Greta Van Fleet. Um, they basically do. It's kind of like 70s rock revival. They sound a lot like Dio. They sound a lot like early Black Sabbath. I mean, they sound a ton like Led Zeppelin. But you can tell that there are different inspirations from different bands around a particular time period. And even though they're like 1970s rock revivalists, they probably still use backtracks. I mean, it doesn't make any sense why you would even complain about that. And going back to the argument I was making about, how Guns N' Roses was just so revolutionary for their time. 1989 comes about and Nirvana creates the grunge scene, which kind of, well, no, not kind of, it did directly contrast with what Guns N' Roses were. Guns N' Roses was a big corporate band at the time, even though they may have started out, playing at the Rainbow in Los Angeles. They were a typical rags to riches story. And just because they started out modest doesn't mean that they didn't become corporate. You know what I mean? I mean, Guns N' Roses, when they came out with their, let me see, Guns N' Roses, it was an album they came out with that had a side A and a side B. The name is skipping me right, uh, right now. What is the name of that album? Use Your Illusion. Yeah, so even though Guns N' Roses started out modest, I mean, this band was the first band to ever hit like multi-million dollar sales. Um, with Use Your Illusion side A doing better than Use Your Illusion side B. And both side A and side B were like on the top 10 most listened to songs of that year. And virtually it was the same album, but the album was so big they had to separate it in two different parts. So part A was like at number 1 and part B was like at number 3 or something like that. And when Nirvana came out in 1989, they really just, you know, I'm sure there was somewhat of a little respect for like a band like Guns N' Roses, because how could you not, right? How, there has to be a little bit of respect about, in any rags to riches story, you know, but Nirvana was very just underground. They loved being underground. That was their scene, was the underground scene. And as time progressed, they became more and more mainstream, which was something that Kurt Cobain mentally could not really handle. Um, by the mid 90s, I mean, Nirvana was everywhere. And people like Kurt Cobain and Dave Grohl, I mean, they couldn't even wrap their head around how that even happened. because they spent so much time and energy into just wanting to stay underground and away from the mainstream, and they inevitably became the mainstream. I mean, they were getting record deals here and there and everywhere, and you know, magazines were coming up to them being like, hey Kurt Cobain, can we use your face for, the face of this magazine?" And he's just like, throwing money over to them. And that just kind of just goes to show just how you can't fight change. You can't fight the inevitable. And there's a new mainstream today, 2022, when this video is being made. People like Scar Lord, organizations like Trash Gang, uh, you know, Falling in Reverse, Ronnie Radke, Machine Gun Kelly, Avril Lavigne. More and more of these artists, like Bring Me to the Horizon, are using computers. I mean, they're using electronic, what the fuck ever you call it. They're using electronics, is what I meant to say. And I don't see how it's so hard to recognize that this is the next phase. I mean, it probably is a hard pill to swallow for boomer rockers and people who prefer, classic rock, that, computers are kind of taking the place of drum sets, and that they're kind of making guitars almost extinct by not needing to use them anymore. But you have to face reality. I mean, technology is not getting progressively worse. It's only going to get better. It's only going to get more advanced, and artists are going to use that to their advantage, you know? And some of the names that I had just named off, like Ghostman, or is that how you pronounce it? Ghostman or Ghosty Man? however you pronounce his name. And Trash Gang and Scar Lord, and even to an extent of like Corpse, you can tell these people are heavily influenced by like 19 late 1980s, early 1990s death metal, or black metal. Ghosty Man has a song called Euronymous, which is directly named after the lead singer of Mayhem, who was a Norwegian black metal band singer. And the you can tell that the overall aesthetic of this music is clearly, black metal, death metal. Just they use it as an inspiration. And going back to the whole Anthrax featuring Public Enemy album, or song, this genre of music, you know, Scar Lord, Machine Gun Kelly, Falling in Reverse, Bring Me to the Horizon, goes all the way back to 1984, or no, 1980. Did I say 1984? I can't remember. Uh, 1987. Yeah, so this goes all the way back to 1987, and Anthrax collabing with Public Enemy was when people realized that, rap and rock and roll, rap and metal can correlate. They can correlate. It wasn't this, using the positive side of the magnet to another positive side of the magnet. You know what I mean? It wasn't conflicting, and people realized that. And so ever since 1987, 43 some years ago, this is what metal music has been building up to. It's been building up to Ghostmane. It's been building up to Scarlord. It's been building up to Trash Gang. It's been building up to Machine Gun Kelly, pop punk. And although these people may be in their own certain lanes, like I wouldn't necessarily call Falling in Reverse pop punk, but that doesn't mean that Machine Gun Kelly doesn't use trap beats. You know what I mean? Machine Gun Kelly is pop punk. He uses trap beats. Ronnie Radke is more like the alternative, um, trap metal band that kind of really popularized it amongst most people. He uses trap beats. Does that mean they make the same music? No, of course not. But not to say that Ronnie Radke couldn't. If Ronnie Radke wanted to come out with a pop punk album, he has the versatility to do that. But what they have made up until this point is different. you know, I don't think too many people can put their finger on what Falling in Reverse is specifically. That's just how versatile they are. But to get back to like Scarlord and Trash Gang and Ghosty Mane, however you pronounce his name, um, these people are clearly inspired by black metal. And aesthetically, in terms of aesthetics, the face paint, the outfits, the font that you put your name in can go as far back as Kiss. So it's just an outdated opinion, to be like, well, you're not a real band if you don't play live. It's like, okay, 99% of bands are not real then, by by that logic. Um, and what we're looking at now is the future. You know, trap beats have taken over guitar playing. Um, like I said, to put in a more versatile category of people, like Machine Gun Kelly, he still uses guitars, but it's more of like in a punk strumming aspect. It's not like, he's gonna be on stage and people expect him to do a guitar solo. Um, with that being said, people have to get over the stigma that MGK is not an influential person in rock music. He is. He's done features with Bring Me to the Horizon. He's done features with you know, Avril Lavigne. He's made it. Because those are two of the top dogs of that genre specifically. And you know, whether you like him, whether you hate him, at the very, very least, he is a gateway into a plethora of other genres that are coming out today. Um, and you know, you can't you can't say he hasn't made it because his face is plastered everywhere. You look up pop punk. I mean, he's one of the biggest names on that list. That isn't, Blink 185. So, or no, Blink 182, excuse me. But in terms of like modern day 2022, obviously Blink 182 isn't really here anymore. Like post grunge, like Bush, they're not even around anymore. A lot of bands that started in the early Y2K scene that got really popular, like Sleeping or Sick Puppies, and Asking Alexandria, which is like a big emo band. They're they're not around anymore. So people with the mindset of things should be the way I want it because I don't like the fact that it's different are ultimately going to be what kills rock and roll. you know, I seen an interview with Gene Simmons, which is already a controversial person in the rock and roll community because of some things that he has said in the past, but he was having an interview with someone who asked, you know, why do you think rock stars are not cool anymore? Because obviously, unless you've been sleeping under a rock for the past like 20 years, hip hop has taken over the mainstream. Hip hop is the status quo. You know, there are more people listening to hip hop now than they are Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Aerosmith, Guns N' Roses, Nirvana. I mean, you have to address these problems. And Gene Simmons responded in a very clever way, um, that that I don't necessarily disagree with him on. He said rock stars became uncool because they fell out of fashion. He said nobody cares about being a rock star anymore because rockers stopped flashing their wealth. He said, there is a certain amount of attraction towards that. He said, rock bands nowadays they don't even have a gimmick anymore. Um, a lot of washed up rockers nowadays are wearing like the fake straw cowboy hat, maybe some fucking Ray-Ban aviators, bootcut jeans, and maybe like a band t-shirt from and it's almost 9 times out of 10 a band that came out of the 80s. Like Nikki Sixx, for example, the bassist for Motley Crue, he wants to act like he is so in the mainstream, but he just cannot come to terms with the fact that he is a washed up musician. He cannot come to terms with the fact that he is a washed up rock star. And Gene Simmons made a very good point when he said that, because what effort are rock stars from the 80s and 90s making to make their genre of music cool again? They're not making any effort at all. Like, oh my gosh. Axl Rose, he's up in age now, and it's just so crazy seeing somebody who used to be a legitimate fashion icon still wearing leather jackets and cowboy boots on stage. Like, these people are so out of touch, and they wonder why hip hop has become such a huge phenomenon that it is today. It's because hip hop has changed with the times. You know, when you listen to hip hop now, it's nothing like what it used to be in the 1980s. When you listen to hip hop now, it's nothing like it used to be in the 1990s. When you listen to hip hop now, it is nothing like it used to be in the early 2000s. But then again, it's like you listen to rock and roll, and it's like oh, well, this has such a 1990s feel. Oh, this has such a 1980s feel. It's like It's like, you know, you are the death of rock and roll, you know? And Gene Simmons had a very good point when he said that one of the main things that killed rock and roll was the fan base, because nobody wants to support the new thing. They want to hold on to this little tradition of what they think a real rock band is, and next thing you know, they're stuck in a 1980s time loop, or time warp, should I say. And they're not the only ones. I mean, you know, your fan base is an extension of who you are, and you know, that's ultimately what has made rock and roll just so uncool, is because they're in such a 1980s time warp. It's like, you still think leather jackets are cool? Like, you you think wearing cowboy boots with like the highest heel possible is like still in fashion with like skinny jeans? Like, no, it's not. It's not. Nobody fucking likes these fake straw cowboy hats anymore. Nobody gives a fuck about your bleach blonde hair, you know, and it's so cringe because you see people from like Motley Crue. Of course, I mean, again, I'm not saying it's because of their age. It's just that they're just so out of touch. You know, these people in the 80s and 90s, they fucked their lives up because of the drugs they took back then. And not to say that's not happening now. I mean, you're probably going to have rappers like 30, 40 years down the road from now that don't even look the way that they used to look because of all the Xanax and, you know, fentanyl and Oxycontin that they've been snorting up their nose and taking in their drinks and shit for the last like 14, 20 years. You know, not to say that it's not going to happen in rap, it probably will, but you just look at them and it you can just tell that they're just stuck in a 1980s time warp. Like, they're these really skinny guys with like super dry skin. You know, their cheeks are all sunk in, their eyes are all sunk in, and you can tell it's like these aren't even people anymore. They're just hollow fucking shells of what they used to be. Meanwhile, you have these groups like Trash Gang, Ghostmain, uh, um, God, what's his fucking name? I just said it. Um, you have people like Machine Gun Kelly, you know, Corpse. That's the guy I was thinking of before. Scar Lord, fucking, you know, you have these people that are making a genuine effort to at least make an inspiration out of this old music that is not being made anymore, and you fucking shit on it for no reason. Like, we have to come to terms that if classic rock was to come back, it's going to be a revivalist group. It's not going to be, you know, it, you can't expect Led Zeppelin to come back and be like, "Oh, we're the biggest fucking shit now." No, their time has come and passed. Their time in the sun has been gone for like 30 years. 30 plus years. And it just agitates the total shit out of me, because it's like people like Greta Van Fleet, the band I mentioned before. Dude, it's so insane how much they get fucking shit on just because they sound like Led Zeppelin, or just because they sound like, you know, somebody else. And people have even went to the extent to call them a cover band. They're not a fucking cover band. They make their own songs, they orchestrate their own sound. I mean, it's like, what the fuck do you want from these people? You've been bitching about how music hasn't been real music for like over 30 fucking years, ever since Led Zeppelin first, stopped making music. And it's like, now that you have this revivalist group, you want to fucking shit on it because it's filled with 20-year-olds who have an ambition. It's fucking stupid. Come to terms with the fact that if rock music in general is to ever come back, it's going to be a fucking revivalist group. It's going to be people that sound like somebody from the 1980s. It's going to be people that sound like probably Nirvana from the early 1990s. It's going to be people that sound like Foo Fighters today. And you can't be mad at it because it's like they're making their own songs, they're orchestrating their own sound. It's like what the fuck else do you want from them? Just because they sound like Led Zeppelin doesn't mean shit. Just because a band sounds like Nirvana back in 1989 means fuck all. At least they're making an effort. But the fan base is killing this fucking genre because they don't want to come to terms with the fact that it's even fucking dying. Punk has come and went. There's a famous saying that punk is dead. That punk rock is dead. But when somebody like Machine Gun Kelly comes out and they're making legitimate numbers, they're doing legitimate collaborations with some of the biggest people of the genre, you want to fucking shit on him and say that he doesn't speak for rock and roll. Well, who the fuck does? Tell me who the fuck speaks for rock and roll? Fucking Eddie Van Halen, he's dead. A lot of people from the fucking 1980s, 1990s are dead now. Fucking fucking Paul McCartney is supposed to have a voice in rock and roll. No. They're fucking out of touch. They're not with 2022 anymore. The only people who quote unquote have a voice in rock music only have the mentality of what it was fucking 20, 30 years ago. And that's not fair to new artists. That's not fair to people that are making a legitimate effort to bring a particular genre back. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, most of these rockers like Gene Simmons, fucking Steven Tyler, fucking Slash, Axl Rose, a lot of these people are going to be fucking dead and buried by the time people like Ghostmane, Machine Gun Kelly, Scar Lord get to be their age. And a lot of these rockers nowadays, a lot of these people that are in the trap metal phase are making better decisions, better business decisions than these motherfuckers were making back in the 1980s and 90s. People have finally put their foot down and said, "No, I don't want to get fucked over by a record label. No, I don't want to get fucked over by not having a license to my own music, to my own intellectual property." Because they've seen how the record labels did Michael Jackson. And how after Michael Jackson died, they made it to where almost nobody can have possession of their own intellectual property like music. Nobody questioned that shit back in the day, except for maybe Nirvana. Nobody did. Not even Tupac back in the day questioned it because Suge Knight was taking like millions of dollars out of Tupac's pocket every time he'd make a fucking album. So, that's all I wanted to say. My voice is like dying now, but I figured I have to get this video out at some point. So, that's my little gripe with the whole situation. I hope to God some people agree with me on that, but If you don't, it's fine. You're the reason the fucking genre is dying, and we're only going to be stuck in a perpetual loop from, you know, that point on.